So, friends, good morning once again, and I welcome you back to this class of video lecture. Friends, this is BA Part 1 English Literature, and we have been checking paper 1 for last couple of days. So, the nomenclature of paper 1 is poetry and drama, and in this paper, in addition to the poems and the play, we have some of the renowned literary terms and theories like sonnet, ode, blank verse, alliteration, tragedy, comedy, renaissance, restoration, etc. So today we take up a very famous and important literary term, that is restoration. This is called restoration. And friends, I always underscore or lay emphasis on the significance of literary terms. In fact, literature and literary terms go hand in hand. So, without the knowledge of literary terms, we cannot understand the poems or the plays. So, friends, we come to restoration. This period takes its name from the restoration of the Stuart line, particularly Charles II, to the English throne in 1660. This period is directly concerned with the restoration of monarchy in England in 1660 under the leadership of King Charles II. And friends, before this restoration, we know that it was a time of parliamentary forces, and under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell, there continued a civil war, and finally uh, the powers of king got defeated, and Oliver Cromwell became the ruler of England, and for 8 years the parliamentary forces reigned England. But after the death of Oliver Cromwell, his son couldn't continue that tradition of democracy and liberty, and finally monarchy was again restored in England in 1660. So restoration is the end of the parliamentary force. So, in fact, the entire British history has been quite turbulent from the point of consistent struggle between the king and the parliament. And Milton was a strong parliamentarian. He sided the powers of liberty, fraternity, brotherhood. So, uh, this period takes its name from the restoration of the Stuart line, Charles II, to the English throne in 1660 at the end of Commonwealth. It is specified as lasting until 700. The urbanity, wit, and licentiousness of the life, centering on the court, in sharp contrast to the seriousness and sobriety of the earlier Puritan regime, is reflected in much of the literature of this age. Yes, what is reflected in the contemporary literature? The urbanity, the growing urbanization is reflected, the growing craze for wit in literature as we enter the era of neoclassical age, where poetry was taken merely as a skill. So wit is reflected in literature, licentiousness of the life. It was a life of Victorian era where pomp and show, where snobbery was there was at their highest point. So licentiousness and sobriety of the earlier Puritan regime is uh, purely reflected in much of the literature of this age. The theatres came back to the vigorous life after the revocation of the ban placed on them by the Puritans in 1642. So this is a very significant development in the culture of England that the Puritans, who were in power in the beginning of the 17th century, banned theatre, having of the view, having of the opinion that theatre, being a branch of literature, rouses human emotions and feelings to a violent extent, and under that violence the human beings might go to every extent. So keeping this particular ideology in mind, the Puritans banned the theatre in England. So it was the same when poetry was banned by Plato in ancient Greek Empire, right? So the theatre was banned, but that ban was uplifted, and theatres came back to vigorous life after the revocation of the ban placed on them by the Puritans in 1642. So in a way, the Puritans were very conservative. Puritans, they had different outlook for life, for uh, you know administration, for culture, for civilization. That's why Puritans couldn't stay for a long period of time. And you see, this was the turbulence which always remained in the life of Europe or in the life of Britain. And out of those continuous turbulences, the civilizations went on growing. So, again, I repeat, the theatres came back to vigorous life after the revocation of the ban placed on them by the Puritans in 1642, although they became more exclusively oriented toward the aristocratic classes than they had been earlier. Sir George Atheries, William Wycherley, William Congreve, and John Dryden. Again, I repeat, these distinctive literary figures of the contemporary times of 17th century England. In fact, there is a very famous book, friends, The 17th Century, The Background to the 17th Century by Basil Willey. The Background to the 16th Century by Basil Willey. Very famous books by classical writers, which are hardly found nowadays. Only library editions are found. So it is expected on the part of teachers, on the part of students, to go through those classical books like A.C. Bradley's Shakespearean Tragedy. So Sir George Atheries, William Wycherley, William Congreve, and John Dryden developed the distinctive comedy of manners called Restoration comedy. Yes, in this time, a specific and exclusive pattern of comedy was originated, called comedy of manners. It was also called the Restoration comedy, and this particular uh, style was developed by Sir George Atheries, William Wycherley, William Congreve, and John Dryden. And John Dryden, who is the father of the Neoclassical school of poetry, with Alexander Pope, or the two representative poets, Dryden and Pope. So Dryden, Thomas Otway, and other playwrights developed the distinctive form of tragedy called heroic drama. Yes, again it is a term, heroic drama, restoration comedy. Friends, as I underscore that without the knowledge of literary term, we cannot understand literature, because terms are a sort of that particular approach with which we analyze a particular work of literature. Dryden was the major poet and critic, as well as one of the major dramatists. John Dryden has been one of the representative poets of this age, with Alexander Pope. Dryden wrote Absalom and Achitophel, which was a political satire. Other poets were the satirists Samuel Butler and the Earl of Rochester, notable writers in prose, in addition to the mastery Dryden, were Samuel Pepys, Sir William Temple, the religious writers in vernacular English John Bunyan, and the philosopher John Locke. Yes, you know, now you say or you see the references of political science, the references of political thinkers also come in our domain. It's very natural, friends, since there are no divisions in literatures, in philosophy. That's why we also talk of political thinkers like John Locke, Aphra Behn, the first English woman. Again, I repeat, keep this thought in your mind and write down. Aphra Behn, the first English woman to earn her living by her pen. Yes, she was the first English woman who earned her livelihood by writing, by publishing her works. Aphra Behn, the first English woman to earn her living by her pen and one of the most inventive and versatile authors of the age, wrote poems, highly successful plays, and Orinoco, the tragic story of a notable African slave, an important precursor of the novel. So this is a very famous, very important and significant literary term, the Restoration. So I just summarize that this term derives its name from the reign of Charles II to the English throne in 1660, following the collapse of the regime of Oliver Cromwell, who who was the champion of democracy in England, right? The literature of this time reflects urbanity, it reflects wit, it reflects licentiousness of the life which was prevalent in the court. So all these things are uh, reflected, and the famous writers of this age, and one more the historical development which took place, that the ban on theater was uplifted and theater came back to vigorous life, and it was a time when restoration comedy or comedy of manners were originated under the leadership of George Etheridge, William Wycherley, William Congreve, and John Dryden. So I think, friends, this is enough for the term restoration. In the coming classes we shall keep on doing the terms which are prescribed in the course, and maybe not prescribed but related to the terms. So for better understanding and critical review, I recommend a very famous book, Basil Villay, The 17th Century Background. Thank you, friends.